Hey, everybody. Hope you're doing great today. Here we are streaming to you from Couchbase. We are also live on LinkedIn right now. So, a great topic for us today, developer productivity, always an important topic. A lot of demos. We're going to show you a lot of demos today. I'm joined today by Matt Groves, DevRel engineer, who's going to talk about writing code with generative AI, which is generally pretty terrific, right? There are definitely some terrific parts, but there's also some pitfalls you want to look out for. So Matthew's going to talk about that. And we're also joined by Mark Gamble, who's a director of product marketing here at Couchbase, and he has a pretty cool demo as well. Couchbase recently announced our own AI functionality. So please stay tuned for that. Mark's going to walk you through and show you a sneak peek of Couchbase IQ. If you have questions, please add them to the questions area at any time that you have them. We'll likely get to those at the end. And also, please check out our docs section. We're going to have some links in there that'll be helpful to you. And if you're on LinkedIn today, they're going to be in our deck as well. So you'll be able to grab some additional information and links from there as well. So I will turn it over to Matthew Groves. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. And thank you all for joining me today. We're going to talk about generative AI, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot, and Bing, and maybe some others. And we're going to talk about this in the lens of writing code, reading code, understanding code, and all the types of things that ChatGPT can do, and how you can get the most out of those generative chat tools. So today's agenda, I'm going to talk about some basic terms and concepts. Should be a review for many of you, but just in case, some limitations of the various LLM chat machines. And then I'm going to talk about this IDEA framework, the IDEA framework for prompt writing that'll hopefully help you to write better prompts and less frustration when dealing with ChatGPT and others. And some more resources I'll mention along the way, give you some links there at the end. So let's start with some introductory terms and concepts. So people often say, ChatGPT is AI. AI is more of an umbrella term, and there's lots of different types. And these are some popular ones you may have seen before. So classification is like for spam filters, sorting data into categories. Regression is using past results to predict future things like housing prices and other kinds of forecasts. Clustering is great for marketing. If you want to find different groups of customers, group them by their spending habits or whatever. But generative is the current hotness, and this has the ability to create new text, new images, new code, and it's conversational. It's more general purpose. You don't have to go in there with the same types of programming burdens that the other AI categories here require. And it can do a lot of stuff already out of the box. You don't have to train it with all that type of new data. Someone else has done all that training for you, basically. So with those generative AI chatbots, basically it consists of prompts and responses. So it is very much a back and forth chat conversation. A prompt is the input you give to generative AI. And it can be very, very simple. It can be a single word here like radishes. And it'll just go off and give you a lot of information about radishes. Or you can give it a command, like a short sentence, write me a haiku about radishes. So they can be very, very complex or very, very simple. And when I say LLM, or that means large language model, these are AI models. They're trained on huge amounts of text data. The actual details of that are documented in papers like Attention is All You Need. These models use transformers. It's kind of the secret sauce to those. They analyze words in context to figure out which are the most important. And they create neural networks. And each of these nodes have a billion to a trillion weights on them. And those neural networks. So this is how they quickly generate new sentences and have values that help it to make decisions that lead to really great emergent text when you start to interact with it. So basically, you can think of it like predictive text. When you're typing on your Android phone, it'll guess what you want to type next, except that it's a lot more complex and it draws on a ton more material to create the responses to your prompts. So that's the basics of how it works. We're probably all familiar with it. You probably all tried it at least once before. And then limitations is really want to start talking about today, right? So as a developer, the top picture is what I was up until 2022, 2021, and now the bottom one is more like what I am now. So instead of banging my head against code, I'm banging my head against prompts. But generally speaking, it's pretty terrific at writing code. But sometimes you're going to run into issues and limitations. So we're going to go over some of those limitations just so you have the right expectations. And before we get into some prompt writing that can help you avoid this situation. So ChatGPT is the main one that everyone is well aware of. It's a very good, very well-known LLM. Its training data includes Wikipedia, Twitter, Reddit, a lot of the public web and text that's available out there. But it's also combined with some human supervision. So it's trained with humans saying which of these responses is better, and humans can then interact. And that's what really makes it so good. They can give it a thumbs up and thumbs down. So there's a reward system built into the training as well. It's not just a big blob of text, but there's other data, including those human-driven rewards. So when we talk about ChatGPT, we got to talk about versions of them. So 3.5 and 4 are the most well-known right now. 3.5 is the free one that everyone can get access to. It is text only, and it has a relatively small, what's called a context window. And I think we'll talk about context window here in a bit. But it is very, very fast. So this is something that 3.5 still has that's better than 4, is that it's extremely fast. Now, ChatGPT 4 is more of the paid version of ChatGPT. And it comes with the ChatGPT Plus subscription. So if you have that, you have access to ChatGPT 4. It can understand images. So if you paste images to it, it can also generate images now with the DALL-E integration. It has a larger context window. So currently, ChatGPT 4 can be up to 32,000 plus tokens in the context window. And what that means is that it's the context, it's the discussion, it's basically ChatGPT's short-term memory. It's how much it can understand at a time. And so once you go past that window, it's going to start forgetting things from earlier messages in the session. The custom instructions are also available for ChatGPT 4. And I think we're going to show this later in a slide today, but this is a way for you to kind of tweak the discussion with ChatGPT. I find it very valuable. ChatGPT 4 in general is slower, but it is more accurate. So I think it gives better answers than ChatGPT 3.5. Of course, that's relative to what kind of answers you're trying to get out of it. And so just a quick note on a ChatGPT 4 Turbo. So this was just announced. This is a last-minute update to this presentation. I don't think any of this stuff is currently in ChatGPT Plus, and I haven't got my hands on it yet. There may be some public previews and stuff. But some updates to this is that GPT-4 Turbo has a much larger token context, so 128,000 tokens, which is huge, especially relevant to the conversation use case we'll talk about later. Or sorry, the conversion use case we'll talk about later. So it can hold more examples and data in conversation. We'll talk about that when we get to the idea portion of this. And also the knowledge cutoff is much later. So that's up to April 2023. And previously it was 2021 was the cutoff for that. So that's relevant, especially if you're working with APIs and SDKs that are newer or updated after that 2021 cutoff. So this is the custom instructions part of ChatGPT 4 experience. And these are things you can tell ChatGPT about yourself and your preferences on how to respond. So here's a few examples that I put into my ChatGPT account. So for instance, I wanted to know that I'm biased towards C# because that's the language I've always developed with. And I don't want it to generate some Python code for me when I want C# to use. So I don't want to tell that every time I'm asking for code. So I just put that in custom instructions so it knows. Otherwise, it may pick a language like Go or Python or whatever else. And that's fine if that's what you want, but I want it to be more consistent with C#. The other thing is that one of the examples there, how would you like ChatGPT to respond on the right side? The last item there is I always wanted to say SQL++ instead of nickel because that 2021 cutoff, all the Couchbase training examples are going to say nickel, but that name was changed later to be the more, I think, the better name of SQL++. So I want it to always say that. I don't want to use the old term, use the new term. Now I'm looking very much forward to trying it after the cutoff has been updated to see that it's in fact using SQL++ on a more consistent basis. But this is kind of one of the limitations you need to work around, is that cutoff date. And if things have changed, the SDKs have changed, APIs have changed between that cutoff and current date, maybe there are some things you can do in custom instructions to make ChatGPT aware of that. Okay, I also want to bring up Bing a little bit because not everyone has ChatGPT Plus. And so Bing is another way to use GPT-4, which is the underlying model that ChatGPT uses. Bing also uses something called Prometheus, which is not the monitoring tool, Prometheus, but it's integration between ChatGPT and the web via the Bing search engine. So it can be more up to date. Now, when I first created this slide, at the time, ChatGPT was not connected to the web, but it is now. So they're kind of more on even footing now. One thing I want to point out about Bing, it has these conversation styles. So creative, balanced, and precise. We'll talk about those for sure. In general, creative is going to provide longer, more entertaining answers. So if you're writing some content, for instance, that might be the way to go. Precise is going to provide shorter, to the point, more accurate answers. And so that may be the way you want to go if you're writing code or trying to reach a conclusion that has a specific answer. And balanced is the default. It's a little bit of both. So more on this later. I mentioned the training data cutoff. So just to review those, ChatGPT currently is 2021. So if you bring up topics or events that didn't happen in 2021 or earlier, it's going to have no idea anything about them. You can get it to guess if you really force the issue, but otherwise, that's it, 2021 or earlier. There is a plugin API. So that's how some, like Wikipedia, has built a plugin that ChatGPT can reference Wikipedia if you turn that plugin on. But of course, ChatGPT 4 now has internet access back as part of it. So that's an option you can check on ChatGPT. Yes, browse the internet. Now Bing can also access the web. There is a conversation limit to it. So conversations can only be, I think, 5 messages total for a single conversation. But if you use it as a regular Bing on a regular basis, you've noticed that the top results from the Bing search engine are often AI generated now. The last thing I want to mention is that I've seen some sources say this is Microsoft Edge only, which is Microsoft's web browser, but I've been using it in other browsers just fine. I've not run into that limitation. So that may have been something they had early on, but it's no longer seems to be the case. Okay, so we've got some basic terms and some knowledge limitations. So let's go into some prompt writing idea framework here, some things that you can do to help make your prompts get a little better results. So I'm not 100% sure I coined this acronym here, but it seems like a pretty good acronym to remember 4 different prompt building blocks. So in order to get a good result, you need at least a question, you need to ask something, or an instruction, like a command. And you can augment either of these with input data or examples. So what are some examples? So here is a instruction. I gave it a command only. So write a SQL query to find the most recent unpaid invoices and give me the phone numbers of the contact person for the company that hasn't paid yet. So I gave it that exact prompt and it gave me this answer. So it did generate a SQL query and it explains the SQL query. So this is generally pretty terrific, right? But what are the chances that these assumptions match your schema and data, right? So you might be lucky and have the same exact table names and whatnot, but you're going to get a better prompt if you give it some input. So write a SQL query to find the most recent unpaid invoices, give me the phone numbers. It's the same prompt as before, but now I'm giving it some input saying, here's where invoice data is stored. It's an invoice records table. There's an invoice contact table, a contact info table, giving us some info about the keys, the foreign keys, and some of the fields in invoice records. Now, one thing that seems to help is if you put the instruction or question before the example or input data, as I've done here. This can improve the output quality. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it seems to provide some benefits there. And so this is the example it's going to give. So now it's a much more accurate SQL query. So another approach to this is, I've given it some English sentences about the structure of my data. But I could also, if my data structure is small enough, I can get the entire DDL. So all the creates and alter statements that make up my database, and I can paste those in and say, here's my DDL. Now write me a query that does such and such. And if you're using a NoSQL database that has a more relaxed schema, you can paste in a bunch of data examples, and that will inform the SQL query as well. So the only limitation for that is, of course, the context I mentioned before. If you have a very large schema, lots of fields, lots of sample data, that might not fit into the context, which is one of the reasons I'm looking forward to seeing ChatGPT 4 Turbo in action, to see how big of a context, big of a DDL I can put in there. Okay, the other part of the IDEA framework is questions, or asking questions. So questions are going to give you a more exploratory output than a command, possibly multiple alternatives to answer your question. Whereas commands generally have a specific outcome. So consider saying, what music should I play versus play some music, question versus a command. You have two different outcomes there. So I'm asking about a family vacation, and it gives me a whole list of different options for family vacations, and different details about reasons I might want to go there. Okay, so that's just a question by itself. Now, if I give it some examples, what would you recommend for a family vacation? Followed by some examples. We like the ocean, not the beach. We love trying new foods. We like being laid back, over following an itinerary, and so on. These are the things that we like, examples of things that we like. So I didn't give it any specific data about previous vacations or any locations to focus on, just things that we like to do as a family. What kind of vacation would you recommend? And so now it gives me, again, a list of possibilities, but much more accurate. I happen to know for a fact that my family loves cruising. So number one result would be Caribbean cruise. That makes sense. So by giving it some examples, we can get a more accurate answer, or multiple answers in this case. Okay, so let's see some of this in action. I've got some screenshots just in case things go wrong, but we're going to go through some demos here. So I've got ChatGPT open over here. And one of the examples I want to go through, we're going to start here. I've done some of these conversations already. So this is an example of a command, just a command. So tell me which state capitals start with the letter A. And fortunately, I've got an accurate answer here. So I've gotten these 5 cities. These are all state capitals in the United States. And there we go. So, but how do we know that this is correct? I mean, I can go and look it up, right? But then I may as well just go in and look up the answer myself, right? So one thing we can do is construct a prompt that's more like this. And this is more along the lines of prompt engineering, if you've heard this term before. So I'm building a prompt that can be reused to give us more reliable information. So this is a prompt up here that I'm saying, here's my question. I want you to use this format to build your response. And if I go back over to this, I've done this already in ChatGPT, giving it this exact prompt. And so now it gives me the answers, but it also gives me these handy links, so I can look up to see where it's getting this data from. So this is Wikipedia right here. It used Encyclopedia Britannica for these, and it's also giving me some information about these capitals. So I can have more confidence that this is the correct answer. One thing that this one did as well, so this is an older screenshot where it used the Wikipedia plugin, but up here, it doesn't show it right now, but there was a box here that said, hey, I'm browsing the internet, here's the websites I'm going to, and that's why it's able to pull in these accurate links to other websites. So there's Britannica, for instance. But yeah, you can use a Wikipedia plugin if you want to. Just search Wikipedia for information. There's other plugins that can provide additional context information to ChatGPT. Now, this does make the answers slower because it does have to go and browse the web and parse all that text and understand how to give you the best answer. But it can provide more up-to-date, correct information. Okay, I want to review the Bing a little bit because it has those options of balanced, precise, and creative. So I asked it the same question and a command. So I phrased this as a command and a question. So the top two are questions. The left is balanced, the right is precise. The bottom two are commands, left is balanced, right is precise. So I tried those 4 combinations. For this particular question or command, Bing really struggled to list all those state names. So it only got 4 out of the 5. So on the right side, you can see, and the other thing, sorry, it didn't actually find the capitals at all. It actually found states that start with the letter A. So it didn't really quite understand what I was asking for. Whereas the right side, the precise version, it got the answers exactly. It got all 5, and it got the cities, not the states. So you look at this and you say, well, I guess I should always use precise if I want the precise correct answer. So I would say for questions and commands where you expect a fact-based exact answer, yes, precise is probably the way to go. But if you want to get more creative, if you're doing some writing or you're trying to, as I'll show you an example of reading code, you might want to go with the more balanced or creative answers, in fact. Now, I showed that prompt engineering earlier where it's like repeat the question and show your sources. The last time I tried it, doesn't seem to work well with Bing. It's not really designed for that sort of interaction. And in fact, Bing chat just kind of shuts down and says, I can't help with that. So really, I think Bing is more geared towards stuff you would do with a search engine. You're looking things up. You're not necessarily trying to be all that creative, although there is some options to do that. Seems like it's not the best fit for it. Okay, so the next demo I want to show is about reading code. So as developers, whether we like it or not, we spend more time reading code than we do writing code. And so I think ChatGPT can be extremely helpful in this situation. So imagine you're onboarding to a new project, or you're trying to evaluate an open source project, and there's a bit of code, you're not really sure what it does, is not maybe commented well or documented well. So ChatGPT is actually really good at that. So this is a very simple SQL++ query here. So Couchbase's query is called SQL++ because it's SQL for JSON. But this is my prompt. This is my engineering prompt right here. So I want it to give me a plain English sentence and avoid technical terms. So I don't want it to use the terms table or bucket or things like that in the sentence. I just want plain English, something that would make sense in a comment or documentation. And so with this query right here, it can translate into an English sentence and tells me what exactly it does. So very nice. But that's a relatively simple SQL++ query. That's, we could probably spend a minute on it and figure out what it does. But what if it was a little bit a wilder query? Something like this. Maybe there's this part of a stored procedure or some SQL embedded into your code, or part of a report and a dashboard, and it's not well commented. I know we've never faced that situation before, right? But, what would happen if we pasted the exact same prompt with this query into ChatGPT? And so this is what I did earlier today, and this is what it outputs here. Top 5 customers for each product category based on the number of purchases that they made. Ranks customers highest to lowest by their purchase count within each category. Now, this, ChatGPT 4 is a little slower. This took probably 15 seconds to write this out. But I probably would have spent a lot longer if this was an undocumented query trying to figure out what it did. And so ChatGPT gives me an understanding, and so I can now accelerate what I'm trying to do to update this query or make changes or fix a bug or whatever, or create a report similar to this. So ChatGPT gives me a very good head start. So I like that about it. I think it's really great for reading code. But let's take that a step further. What about writing code? So if ChatGPT can read code, one of the things that I think it's really great for is looking at existing code and then making some tests for that code. Now, I'm not 100% certain that we should be writing the body of the tests with ChatGPT. If we're writing the code with ChatGPT and the tests, there's potential there for something going wrong. But I think one great use case for this is to look at some existing code and create some shell tests for that code. So this is a prompt that I've come up with. Write in the unit tests for this code and creating just kind of a template of method names. So I actually did this with another tool called GitHub Copilot. So I can go ahead and just do a quick example of this. If I can copy and paste this, or do I already have it in here somewhere? Okay. All right. So how do I do a copy and paste? I may not be able to do a copy and paste right now. So anyway, so what I would do is I paste this into GitHub Copilot, and what it would generate is not the actual test code, but it would look at my code, navigate through it, and figure out, well, there's a conditional here and a conditional here, and these are the tests that you should write for good coverage of this code. So it's doing two things for me. It's saving me some typing, yes, but it's also navigating the structure of the code to figure out what test I should be writing. And then, I'll leave it to you if you want to actually use ChatGPT to write the test. I would say probably not a good idea, but certainly it's possible. But at very least, it saves you a bunch of typing and also helps you navigate the code to figure out what test you should write. Okay, the last one I want to touch on is one that I'm very interested in. I think there's a lot more work to be done in this area, but it is the conversion of code. So, for instance, what if I wanted to upgrade to a newer SDK or API from an old version, or maybe a newer version of C#, or I wanted to switch from something like Entity Framework, shown here, which uses SQL Server, over to Couchbase. So I'm very interested in that particular use case. So this snippet here is from a project called the Conduit Real World project. So this is a very small portion of a website that's kind of a medium clone. That's the social blogging website. But this little bit of code right here uses Entity Framework to get some comments for a particular article. So let's start very, very simple with a prompt that says convert this C# code using Entity Framework over to use the Couchbase SDK 3 instead. Now, I'm over-specifying perhaps Couchbase SDK 3 because I think it is important to do that because of that cutoff date. Because SDK 3, there's less training material up until that cutoff date in 2021 than there is now. So if we specify that SDK 3, it's going to give us a more accurate response. So again, I did this earlier. This is the prompt that I put in right here. And this is the output. So it generates some code for me, but it also gives me a lot of information about what it has to do to convert that code over and the assumptions that it makes. So it's literally saying, I'm going to assume. So this goes back to that first SQL query I showed you earlier. It's actually stating its assumptions for you, showing you the code example. Some of this code is not really necessary at every function level, but it does say that you probably don't need to create a cluster object for every single method. That's something that you can do at the application level. So it's giving all this information, but it's giving you a piece of code that is, as far as it knows, valid. And you can try out that code, be a good starting point for you if you're trying to convert from one database to another. Okay, but that was a very, very simple prompt there, just like one sentence and the code. If I wanted to do something a little more, so this is kind of what it might generate. So something a little bit more involved, what I'd have to do is now give it some input. Give it some input about my data. So this is a much longer prompt. You can see here, I started with that same sentence, but I'm saying here's an example of the article document in the articles collection. A user document, users collection. Comment document, comments collection. So I'm giving it examples of all this data so that it can make a better piece of code for me. So I think this code is a little better. It's still not quite there. Like I said, it's generally pretty terrific, but it's a very good starting point. We've got parameterization here. We've got a pretty good SQL query that we could try out, see if it works, make adjustments to it. We've got going through the result asynchronously, and it also makes some comments about, here's some things that I've done that you may want to adjust when you're actually running this in your actual code base. So that's the last demo I have. Just keep in mind that training set, the Couchbase SDK 3 was brand new in 2020. So the cutoff was 2021. So there's far fewer examples. So it helps to overspecify so that it will filter out the examples that don't really apply. It makes assumptions that could be wrong. Make sure that you understand what those assumptions are. I got a lot more work to do in this area. It's something I plan to focus on, especially when ChatGPT 4 Turbo hits the scene. But I did this conversion in about 2 minutes. one prompt, in this case, no examples, and it was at least 80% of the way there. So imagine the possibilities this opens up in terms of keeping your apps modern, trying new technologies. I think it's not too far off than maybe even is here right now that LLM can take over much of that rote, repetitive typing work and give developers more time to focus on the problem solving and decision making and polishing of code. So that's all I have. I want to turn it over to Mark here in a minute. But if you're interested in some, going deeper in some of these areas, I definitely recommend checking it out. Hey, we're on LinkedIn today. This is great. This LinkedIn learning course on prompt engineering, how to talk to the AIs. It's a great course, not too long. Lots of great stuff in there about building prompts. If you're interested in the custom instructions, I think these are very, very helpful. If you're in ChatGPT every day, like I am, you can look some more examples of that. There's a Twitter thread or an X thread about that you can look into. And if you really want to get into the really deep engineering stuff, check out this white paper, Attention is All You Need. By the way, most of the pictures for this presentation were all DALL-E generated. This one I found particularly funny. My prompt was a person's head filling with knowledge. I thought pretty wild-eyed, alien-looking guy with books coming out of his head. So I really enjoyed that one. So that's all I have. I want to turn over to Mark here to show you some more cool stuff with writing prompts and working with data.
Yeah, that was awesome, Matt. Really, really cool to get your insights from all your great research. I'll go ahead and share on my end and kind of continue the party, as it were. So let's see, I'll ask my colleagues to chime in if I'm not sharing. Okay, that's a good sign. So, I mean, the thing I love most about that is it makes it really clear that AI can ChatGPT and these kind of tools can really help with development, but it just takes careful thinking to get it right. Love the point you made about you used to wrestle with code, now you wrestle with prompts. So it's kind of clear, the robot apocalypse isn't coming anytime soon, but this is going to accelerate that time, I think. So now we're going to transition to taking a look at our latest emerging feature. But first, a little bit about Couchbase. So Matt's talked about interacting with databases. We both are obviously from Couchbase. And we want to set context, a frame of reference for the rest of the presentation. Couchbase can be a boon to development. And we're going to show you some of our latest developments in the product that will really help that. So Couchbase is a cloud-native NoSQL database that's used to power gigantic applications. LinkedIn, for example, those of you watching on LinkedIn, to log in, you have used Couchbase, for example. But add to that list Tesco and Comcast and Amadeus and United Airlines and big enterprise customers, household names that use this to power their critical applications. And when we describe Couchbase, it's multi-model. And this means it's a combination of database concepts. So first, it's the processing of key value information in memory for hyper-fast responsiveness. This is how LinkedIn provides such a fast, responsive login and user experience, for example. Second, the distributed storage of JSON document-based data, and that's for flexibility and resilience for you developers. But on top of this, add full support for containerization, mobile and edge capabilities, capabilities for calling machine learning models directly from the database, and add a full set of built-in features like SQL support that Matt talked about, ACID transactions. These are not typically found with document databases, but are part and parcel with Couchbase. And on to that, add full text search, eventing, analytics. These are things that customers no longer have to bolt together from a bunch of different technologies. And with all of this, you have Couchbase, arguably in a nutshell. And Capella is our managed version. This is our database as a service hosted in AWS, Azure, and GCP. And it provides that fully managed cloud NoSQL database as a service for, powering your applications. I mean, a cloud service takes all that onus off of you to install and configure and maintain your own infrastructure and environment. And that saves you time and money. And it also includes app services. That's fully managed backend services for sync, authentication, and access control for mobile and IoT apps. It's ideally suited for edge and IoT, where internet can be spotty and the number of clients can be, literally in the hundreds of millions of devices. So let's start to turn towards the AI focus from Couchbase. And our AI strategy involves these 4 tenets. We consider these imperatives that we want to enable for our customers. First, we want to accelerate developer productivity, right? We want to help your software developers make the best use of their time and get quality products to market more quickly. Next, we want to provide a database platform that can help optimize AI processing. Some of the more maybe what we might consider traditional AI, recommenders and image recognition, things of these kinds of nature. And we can also help speed up training iterations or integrating directly from the database to your ML models for that real-time evaluation of operational data. And then we want to enable AI-driven apps everywhere, right? Because data and the users that consume it are at the edge. That's where it's produced. So you need to also be able to enable AI-based applications at the edge, where it can have the most impact. And lastly, we recognize great symbiosis with partners that help complete this AI ecosystem for customers. Leveraging the best technologies for any given solution. But now let's focus on our first strategy to accelerate developer productivity. And when we consider the developer's journey and tasks, this is where you might want to start thinking of the idea process, right, that Matt talked about. We know that development can typically begin with a blank slate. The developer has to think through what they need to build. And then they have to investigate and research. And this eventually leads to writing the code, but that's not where it ends, of course. That's because we have code, we have to test it for functionality and how it works with our data. And we have to find and fix bugs, right? And rinse and repeat until you have a final product. So what if you could have a brilliant AI assistant that could help with things and make things faster? So I think it might be time to chat with Capella IQ. All right, hopefully you're seeing my interface here. First off, note that I'm showing a sneak preview of the IQ feature. It's currently in private preview. So as such, some of the UI elements are probably going to change in the final release, of course. But this should give you a sense for what the tool will enable for developers. And notice that I'm not going to give a full tour of the interface. This is a live demo. I'm currently logged in to my demo database and on the data tools. And what we see is IQ demo. I've created the database, and it just has its default elements. The default and system scopes, no data at all. And maybe I'm a new developer, and I'd like to start learning how to work with Capella, and IQ can be that assistant. So suppose I want to, maybe I'm creating an application for a wine shop. A favorite topic of mine, wines. And so rather than go out and find data or, heaven forbid, use production data for trying out development, I'm going to ask IQ for a little help here. So first, let's go in and ask IQ to create a scope. So I'm just, actually, this is a command, right, to following what Matt talked about. Create a scope named Wine Shop. And IQ says, okay, easy. And we go ahead and run that. Notice now Wine Shop has popped in. So scope is analogous to a schema. So now let's get the next layer down for our wine application. I'll say now, create a collection named wines in the scope Wine Shop. And I'm sort of being progressively a little more suggestive and a little more specific here. So we ask IQ, create the collection Wine Shop wines. And it drops into place. Now we have wines under Wine Shop. Great, we're making some progress. I'm going to set my context now to that wine shop. And let's step it up just a notch. I'd love to get some sample data in there to work with, but I want it to be realistic, right? I don't want it to be wine 1, wine 2, brand 1, brand 2. So I'm going to be very descriptive here. Like Matt said, we use example. So create 10 real looking sample documents of wines with real sounding names, like Chardonnay, Cab Sauvignon, for Mondavi, Penfolds, Carlo Rossi, or others. And so being very specific here. And sometimes creating sample data or finding sample data, especially that is realistic in nature, can be a arduous task for a developer. And that's before you even start working with code, right? You're wasting time on data. So now IQ can really accelerate that process. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And just like that, I'm going to select the wine shop scope, and we have now tons of documents here, all with real looking and real sounding names. So you can start to get the sense here, hopefully, that IQ can really begin to accelerate especially those things that used to take a ton of time. So now let's go in and let's ask a query. So I'm going to say, create a query to show all the wines from Mondavi. And it brings back that SQL statement. Let's try again. So it is a live demo. I just proved that. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and run that query. And it came back in about 10 milliseconds. Might not seem like a long time to you and me, but when you start talking about ecosystems with millions of users, 10 milliseconds is eternity and can, really become a problem overall. So why is that? Well, let's take a look at the plan. And what's happening here is with our sample documents, our query has to, go in and actually look in every document. Where is that Mondavi? And this is because JSON document databases are distributed, and so they rely on indexing to speed things up. It provides that directive now for queries to find the data that they need much faster. So notice that, in fact, IQ has, basically realized this and suggests that I create this index, and it even wrote it for me. So let's go ahead and build it. And now let's run that. And it used to be just about 10 milliseconds. Now it's down to 3.5. So, and again, you can utilize this methodology to really make the most performant possible applications. And as we look a little closer now, of course, with that index, the query runs faster because it knows right where to go for the data that I put in as criteria. All right, so now I'm starting to get the hang of this IQ thing. Let's go in and have a little more fun. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of everything we've done before. And I'm going to start from scratch. Now let's do everything we just did in increments all at once. So I'm going to say, let's create a scope, collection, and data for an inventory management app with an audio store. And look at this, it's gone in and it's doing everything. So as you start to get the hang of it, even your working with IQ, it begins to accelerate. So go ahead and run that, and it will create all of the data, and it creates that scope and that collection. And here we see, I have my inventories. So I now have everything that I need. Let's go ahead and say, write me a query. Show me all the items in the headphones collection that cost more than $70. And it writes that SQL++ for me. And we've got a couple of expensive headphones in there. And of course, now that we've got the hang of it, maybe we want to start working with our code and taking advantage of some of this. So IQ can even help here. Oh, lastly, it also suggests how I can speed this up. That took 26 milliseconds. And we've cut it down by orders of magnitude. All right, so that's the query that I want to use in my app. So I would like to ask IQ to help me generate some code to plug this query into my Node.js-based app. So it generates some sample code that uses the above query, and it uses the Node.js SDK and writes out some starter code for me. It even tells me what I need to replace with my own environment information. So I can simply copy this, pop over to my IDE, and I've got a starting place there. So, hopefully this has been really indicative of, the value that we see IQ bringing to the developer's experience. By augmenting your development process with AI, you can, reduce that time and effort to, learn new technology, or to migrate, in this case, maybe from a relational database, for example, or to learn the nuances of working with Capella. And it reduces those costs to get started. And overall, those can, of course, reduce risk. If you're interested in joining up on that private preview, follow the QR code to the sign up page. We'd love to have you. And regardless, make sure and take advantage of that Couchbase Capella free trial. Again, on AWS, Azure, and GCP. And then we want to also make sure that you get out of the resources here today, the brand new IDC Market Perspective, Market Note Paper, Couchbase in an AI First World. And this, you can read an analyst's take and view on Couchbase's AI capabilities, features, and get some insight on where they see the market going. So scan the QR code to download it, or go ahead and get it in the resources for this webcast. All right, and that kind of brings us to a close on the prepared remarks. So, Suzanne and Matt, do we have any questions?
We do. So one question from our main stream here is probably for Matthew. How safe is it to provide real life code in ChatGPT queries?
Yes. So this really depends on what you think about OpenAI's policies, right? And what you paste in there and what they're allowed to do with it. You may have noticed in my demo, I pasted in some very sensitive password data as a JSON example. That's okay, because I know it's not a real password that actually goes anything. But in general, I would try to avoid doing that, pasting anything sensitive in there. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, but I believe with Capella IQ, it's not going to send any actual data to GPT. It's going to send metadata, so the names of fields and things, but not going to actually send the data, unless, of course, you paste that data in for some reason. But correct me if I'm wrong there, Mark. Does that sound right?
The model is Couchbase specific. So if you ask it, it's meant to try and help protect you. And if you start putting anything in that it detects may be sensitive, it just will tell you so. Sorry, can't help you with this. So accurate.
Right. But in the case of, if you said, write me a query that matches a given password, it's not going to actually look at password values. It's going to look for a password field in the JSON. I believe that's how it works. So, ChatGPT is general purpose. Capella IQ is Couchbase, custom tweak to Couchbase. So I would feel more confident with Capella IQ if you're concerned about, real life code and that being put to, shared someplace it shouldn't be shared.
Yeah. So this may be related. Is there any way to minimize hallucinations and recognize that they're hallucinations?
Well, so in terms of creating code, the easiest way to recognize hallucination is it's not compiling, right? So that's actually one of the great things about using this to write code is it's not going to work, right? That being said, in terms of other content, more creative content, I think trying to get those sources, I have those ChatGPT contexts where I want it to provide sources whenever possible. And so if you have a concern that it's not rooted in reality, you can go look at those sources and verify that. So I would just, remain vigilant, try to get sources when you can. And with code, it's just going to be a compiler is going to tell you one way or the other.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Mark?
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I thought your example where you finally said, think it through when you list out the capitals and then provided links off to the sources. That's a perfect example of making sure that the robot really tries its hardest to be accurate. And from a broader perspective, on the Couchbase side, we would say by simplifying your database architecture and minimizing, simplifying your stack is another way to start to mitigate hallucination, because then you kind of have more checks and balances, a single conduit of information that can, act as the sole repository of truth, if you will, in some cases. So that can definitely help, we think, as well. The more database sprawl you've got feeding into the robot, the more chances there are for the robot to get something wrong in the process. So, yeah, great question.
So let's look at some questions that are actually coming in from our LinkedIn viewers here. Happiness, I love your name. That's wonderful. Are there any specific challenges in training generative AI models, and how are they addressed?
Yeah, so actually training models is becoming a little more important. Some of the things that OpenAI announced about custom GPTs, I think the main concern there is there's a risk of maybe overtraining. So there's this great example of a GPT that was trained based on Slack conversations from a company. And the command was, to ChatGPT, write me a paper on such and such. And the response from ChatGPT was, okay, I'll do that tomorrow. Which is not what you want from your robot, right? You want it done right away. So I think there's a risk of perhaps overtraining, maybe giving too much data, and not, if you're training your own model, not providing enough human input on that. That's one of the things that makes ChatGPT so great. And I think IQ is based on one of the GPT models as well, is that there's human input that goes into it.
That's right. Agree. Also, just to chime in, it's an interesting thing with AI. Kind of the more data you give it in training, so goes the saying, the smarter it can get. But that's where you need to make sure that the data that you're giving it is in itself good data. And so yeah, training is typically takes tons of iteration. So again, kind of back on the bandwagon of simplifying kind of the corpus that your AI has to train against can actually also speed up training iterations.
Great. And we have one more question. In your daily work, if you generated a piece of code, how much time does it take on average to modify a generated code and use it with your own?
So I don't have an exact number for you. I have a couple comments though. So I recently was building, so that conduit application I showed a sample of, I built that entire application on a Twitch live stream, heavily using ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot and whatnot. And so if you want to, you can go back over that video stream and see where I struggled and see where it did great. If I had to put a number on it, I'd say, some code snippets, it was correct right out of the box, and I just pasted them as is and went on my way. And some of the code snippets, it was maybe 40 to 50% wrong. And so, it took me, sometimes I just said, it's not going to work. Let me retry it. But I think as that context size grows, if currently, GitHub Copilot has to use some sort of RAG querying to look at a whole code base. But as that context grows, potentially an entire code base could be in context, and that's going to really increase accuracy. So if I had to say 75% right now, I think it's only going to get better.
Great. That's all the questions that we have. It looks like we're wrapping up on time. Just a quick mention that we are going to be at AWS reInvent here in a couple of weeks. Booth, what do I have? 1095. So are we going to see Mark and Matthew there at AWS reInvent. We're going to see Mark there. Okay. So great opportunity to stop by the booth, learn more about Couchbase IQ, or talk to any of our folks about, generative AI or anything that you might be interested in. We'd love to chat with you. So maybe we'll see some of you in Las Vegas. Otherwise, hopefully we see you again for another webcast very soon. Thanks so much, Matthew and Mark Gamble. Take care, you guys.
Thanks, Suzanne.
Bye, everyone.